Today we're going to learn about graphing. Make sure you have your notes worksheet in front of you that you can fill out while you watch this video. If you didn't get a notes worksheet in class, you can take detailed notes on a sheet of notebook paper. Our learning objectives for this video, you don't have to write the learning objectives down, but you should know that these are the things that you're going to be able to do by the end of the video. Student will be able to create accurate scales for graphs. Student will be able to graph data accurately, and student will be able to interpret graphed data. If you're listening to this without the volume turned up, make sure you turn up the volume. You should be listening to these videos. Remember, you want to learn this information. You're not just doing these videos just to get them done, okay? You are an awesome student. You can do this. All right, let's dive in. So a graph is something you already know about. It's just a visual display of information or data. You've seen lots of different graphs before, so this should not be new to you. Hopefully this is just review. So we're going to talk about 3 different graphs today. The first one that we're going to talk about is a line graph. Line graphs show trends. Another way to think about a trend is how the data changes over time. For example, is it decreasing as this line is doing over time? And I know that I'm going to have to draw a line graph when both sets of data are numbers. For example, down here on the x-axis, this is my x-axis down here, and the numbers on the y-axis, this is the y-axis, both of those are numbers. And so if both the y and the x-axis have numbers on them, then I'm probably going to be drawing a line graph. If you can't remember which axis is x and which one is y, I always think the x is low and the y is high. It rhymes. The y is high. So that's a really easy way for you to remember which axis is which. The second type of graph we're going to look at this year is a bar graph. These are used when the data on the x-axis are not numbers. So for example, down here we might have the names of planets, Saturn, Jupiter, etc. Or we might have the names of students, or we might have the different color names down here on the x-axis. On the y-axis we still have numbers, but down here on the x-axis there are no numbers. And so you can see that this is a bar graph. We have these different bars representing the data instead of a line graph. And the last graph that we're going to talk about today is a pie graph. And these are used when you want to compare portions of a whole thing. For example, when all values, sorry about that, that get cut off. It should say when all values add up to 100%. So this is helpful to know, for example, how much water maybe we use for every single thing that I do throughout my day. And in a pie graph, it's really easy to see just looking at this graph that the toilet and the clothes washer and the shower are the 3 things that are taking up the most of that whole 100% of the water that I use on a daily basis. All right, so we're going to teach a skill right now of just creating a scale. In other words, figuring out what numbers are going to go over here on the y-axis. Now, this is something that some students can do really, really well, and some students struggle with. If you struggle with this and you need to stop and rewind this video to do it again and listen again just to make sure you get it, then feel free to do that. We're going to start by counting the number of boxes on the axis. Now, the axis down here, this is the x-axis. Let's label that so we know that's our x-axis. That's already labeled for you. So we know we don't have to actually do anything here. So we're actually going to label the y-axis. Let's label this the y-axis. Remember, the x is low, the y is high. That's how I know which one is which. And we're going to count the number of boxes on this y-axis. So here's 1 box, here's 2 boxes, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. There are 12 boxes on that y-axis. And so our second step is to subtract the highest value minus the lowest value of whatever data I'm trying to graph on that graph. So I've got to look at my data first, subtract the highest value minus the lowest value, and then divide by the number of boxes I just counted up on that axis. And then finally, you're going to round up to find the scale to use. So we're going to go through an example of this so that way you can kind of see how these two steps work together to create a graph. Everything that is in yellow on this slide, you should have written down on your notes page. If I'm going too fast, remember you can pause the video and go back and listen to it again. Make sure you copy everything down that you need to in your notes. So we already figured out the number of, this says lines. Go ahead and change this, that should say boxes. We counted the number of boxes to be 12 in our example here on our y-axis. And so our next step in creating this graph is, we already said, was to subtract the highest value minus the lowest value in our data. So here is my data table here. March, the average rain in inches is 53. In April, it was 175. In May, this is 110. I know that that's hard to read. In June, it was 68. And in July, it was 93. So my highest value here is 175. So you should be writing this on your paper as well. And our lowest value here is 53. So I just did that first part of step number 2. I subtracted the, actually no, I haven't even subtracted yet. That's my next step. I got to subtract my highest value minus my lowest value. So if I subtract these, 5 minus 3 is 2, 7 minus 5 is 2, 1 minus 0 is 1. So I ended up with 122, what happens when I subtract my highest value minus my lowest value. So that's how much I have to fit on this axis. And I have 12 boxes. So if I want to figure out how much I'm going to go up by each box, I'm going to divide that by 12. So when I divide that by 12, and if you want to do this with a calculator, you're more than welcome to do that. When I divide that by 12, I end up with 10.17. Okay, so 10.17, that is a little more than 10. But because it is bigger than 10, I can't just go up by 10. Because if I did that, I'm going to run out of room. So I need to go up by something bigger than that, right? So what's bigger than 10? And this is where that whole idea of rounding up comes from. Well, I could round that up to 11, but that would be weird. If I started off down here, let's say with 53, and then my next line I'm going to go up by 11, what? No, that's just weird, right? Nobody does that on a graph. So I'm not going to go up by 11. You want to go up by something maybe even, right? Maybe you could go up by 15. Well, that's weird too. I've never seen a graph just go up by 15 because that's hard to count by. You want to go up by something that's easy to count by. So I think it would make the most sense to go up by 20, okay? Because I can count by 20s really easy, 20, 40, 60, 80, right? So I would start with my lowest number. Now my lowest number is 53. You can start with 53. That's fine, right? That's not a problem at all. It might make a little bit more sense though to start with a nice even number. So if you went down and you started with 50 here for this line, then we can go up by 20. And the next number, 50 plus 20, is 70. And then my next line up would go up by 20 again. So 70 plus 20 is 90. And so you're going to go up by 20s. I'm going to continue doing this. You should do this as well and label the rest of your y-axis. If you pause the video, do your graph, and then you can come back and see if you did it right. So here's what your scale should look like. We went up by 20s each time. We started off with 50, 70, 90, 110, 130, 150, 170, 190. If your graph doesn't look like this, make sure you fix it. All right, here's your first check for understanding. We're going to create a graph of this data. Is this going to be a bar graph or a line graph, and why? Hopefully you got that right. We are going to be creating a bar graph. Why? Because the month names that are down here are not numbers. And anytime you have something other than numbers on your x-axis, we are going to be creating a bar graph. So I'm going to get you started graphing this, and then you are going to pause the video to finish it on your own. We're starting here with March. For March, the number is 53. If this is 50 and 70 is here, 60 would be halfway between. 53 is much lower than that, right? If that little line I just drew is 60, then halfway between 50 and 60 is 55. So it's going to be even closer to that lower line of 50 than I think, right? So it's just going to be a teeny tiny little bar right there for March. Once I'm done with that, put a little check next to that number so you know you're done, and go on to the next one. The next one is April at 175. Remember that May, this is actually 110. I know that that's hard to read. So go ahead and pause the video and create your graph of average rain for each month, and then start the video again to check your work. Okay, this is what your graph should look like. If your graph does not look like this, then please pause the video, fix your graph before you go on to the rest of the video. Okay, so we have a few checks for your understanding here to see if you understood graphs. Would you create a line graph or a bar graph for this data that is shown below? Great job. Make sure you play this video to the end so that it says complete and you get full credit for watching this Edpuzzle video. See you in class.